Welcome to Common Sense Rhode Island. This is a program where we try to make sense out of the policies that affect your life and come up with common sense solutions. I'm Representative Patricia Morgan, and today we have with us retired Lieutenant General, Adjutant General of Rhode Island Emeritus, Reginald Centracchio, also known as Reggie. Welcome.
Good to be here. Thank you.
Thank you for coming. Reggie, I asked you to come today because there's been an awful lot of terrorist acts, very violent ones, deadly ones, in the last month, 2 months. 5 major ones around the world, 2 here in the United States, but also with our allies in Europe. So it feels like the terrorists are ramping up, and I thought it would be a good time to talk about it with our viewers. What do you make of all this terrorism? Because it really seems to be getting worse.
Well, I think that we need to understand the definition of terrorism. Terrorism has been around as long as the world has been around. As long as you do something that would terrify someone else, it's referred to as terrorism. But now it's taken on a different meaning, so to speak. And within that meaning, you have international terrorism, you have national terrorism, you have homegrown terrorism, you have lone wolf terrorism, and all those kinds of things that seem to be popping up every so often. But they all have something in common. There's a common denominator.
Sure, there's a common thread to all of them.
Right, the end result. And what happens obviously means you're projecting some kind of violence, and the end result is someone loses their life, and it impacts the community rather significantly, either at the international level or the national level or state or the local community.
I think even when it happens in Europe, it affects us here. I mean, this latest one, the truck violence.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
It was horrific.
Yeah, and I think that's a good point that we need to understand. The vehicles that they use, and in fact we talk basically that radical Islam uses that as a vehicle to project violence, to try to change the Western civilization to being Islamic. And they'll use any form whatsoever to include, obviously, killing someone who doesn't subscribe or believe in what they believe. It could be either a gun or a knife or some other thing. But obviously they've right, a bomb or some other explosive or some other ordnance. But we saw recently that the vehicle, which is a deadly weapon to begin with, is used. And they use different vehicles from time to time. And I don't mean vehicle as a 4-wheel vehicle. I mean the vehicle could be anything from, a bomb.
Different ways to deliver.
Exactly. So what we say is they leverage what seems to be the weakness in a particular society. But you had mentioned when we look at Europe, their rail systems are very vulnerable. Their highway systems are vulnerable. The difference is that they have more of an open society than we do, and I say that in such a way that
Europe has more open than we do?
Yeah, because they have, their borders allow,
there's a
tremendous infusion of different, people that have different ways and means to be within a society. And I think if you look at Germany, and if you look at France, and you look at England, specifically those 3 countries, the preponderance of more Muslims coming into those areas that believe differently than the society, they, rather than acclimate themselves into that society, they're attempting to change the society to what they believe. In fact, as I understand it, there are 2 places within the United States that's happening. People.
Where is that here in the United States?
In Michigan and Texas. There are 2 places that are basically the majority of those individuals living in that area subscribe to something more radical than the laws that you and I pay attention to. And it's referred to as Sharia law. And they don't necessarily pay attention. And the police would rather not go into those areas because they don't pay attention to what you and I would say, okay, you can't do this because it's the law of the land. When you have a large population that believes in something totally different, they have a way of migrating to that rather than what is.
So are these immigrant areas, or are they homegrown? I mean, we have Muslims.
Yeah.
Just in the United States that are Americans, but are these mostly immigrant conclaves?
Well, it depends. You You know, let me go back to maybe 1920s, 1930s in this country. You look at Rhode Island as an example. That's a prime example. Certainly not terrorism, but I mean, to draw the analogy and the point. You had communities within Rhode Island that were basically Portuguese, Irish, Italian,
Sure.
and others. And they each
They
stayed
lived
within
close
their
to
own.
one another.
In fact, you had a church here, and you had a church here, within 100 yards of each other. But the Italians would go here, and
The French were here, the
and rest-
Italians, the Irish church,
Right.
yes.
And so consequently, you have the same kind of thing happening in a different way today. It has much to do with exclusion versus integrating people
Into
into our
the-
society, or
yeah.
acclimating as to what we believe. So that's one danger that we're looking at from a realistic
Well, I
point of
know in
immigration
France,
in
I've
general.
heard that they have no-go zones, seriously, where the civil authorities from France don't go there
Yeah.
because they are Muslim in whole and
Yeah.
they follow their own rules, they have their own
Yeah. But I
ways
think
of
it's-
dealing with
it's-
crime or
Yeah, it's
whatever.
essential to recognize that we're both talking about Muslims, and generally speaking, Muslims are peaceful people. They don't interpret what they believe in as violent, but there is a radical element to that, and it's called radical Islam. And they take the interpretation of what they believe to the point where if you don't believe in it, then you need to be subject to being executed or taken out of the society. That's a problem, because now that's referred to as jihad, which is a religious war. There's another side of that, and it has to do with an infusion of large numbers of different ethnic individuals coming into a society. Rather than do it by violence, what they do is through osmosis of changing that society to something that is alien to what you and I have subscribed to, and that's the law of the land. So they have a different kind of an interpretation of how they want to live. And that's okay, you know, providing it doesn't get violent, and providing we don't forget that there are laws in the land that need to be followed.
Sure. I mean, I know in France it really is a huge problem. I think it has become a huge problem in England, which is why they wanted to exit the European Union. But in France now, my understanding, it's 25% of France is Muslim that have immigrated from the Middle East. And when they come, they have large numbers of children, so it just keeps growing that population.
Yeah.
So they have some significant issues going on over there.
I think the thing that is most significant, as I've seen it in my 76 years, is when my parents came to this country, and my grandparents came to the country, they were very intent on learning to speak English and making sure that you became part of that society and you were accepted. So consequently, it's different today where people come into the country, they want to change to what they believe in and not necessarily assimilate into that society.
Yeah, and that's too bad, because I think the United States is the best place in the country, in the world to live in. And
is.
I wish they'd just come and embrace what we have to give here, because we have a lot to offer.
We do,
People.
and I think eventually they'll realize that.
I hope so, but we have had acts of terrorism here.
We have,
We had the Boston Marathon bomber, we had Twin Towers,
yeah.
now we've had San Bernardino, we had the Army, Captain-
Down at Fort Hood.
Fort Hood.
Yeah, and he was he was a major in the United States Army, and consequently, we need to understand they're all over through our society.
Yeah, so anyway, we're going to talk about that a little bit when we get back.